Hey, Jeff Johnston here, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. Have a super exciting guest today that I'd like to say I've known since my high school days, but I'd be lying to you. I just met him recently, like a lot of my guests, through LinkedIn primarily, but was really just pulled in by something that caught my eye. Tom, I was reading your profile, and you had mentioned something about I don't know if it's a metaphor, if it's a true story, but someone asked you at a cocktail party, what do you do? And you said something like, I get men sober. That's a great way to mic drop at a cocktail party. Welcome to the show. I know we're going to talk about a lot, but that's one thing that caught my eye when I first read your profile.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. This is an honor, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun.
So do you really say that at cocktail parties?
Oh, I do. So I'm in Boston, and we have a summer house down in Westport, Mass, where my wife grew up going. And it's like one of these little New England, you know, two inbred communities on the water. And there's like this little dinky golf club with a bunch of Yankees, all of whom get drunk. And I've been sober 26 years, and
good for you, man.
And I've been working on myself a lot, and it's like, as a guy, like that's the worst question ever to have to answer. What do you do? And it's usually like one of those events. It's after like somebody has just told me like, how many millions of dollars they have, and that they're the CEO of Amazon or whatever. And like
isn't that the truth though?
Yeah, I had a bump in the road about 5 years ago where I had a mental health crisis, which kind of really changed my focus on about everything.
Right.
And I finally figured out that none of that shit matters. And so I was trying to grapple with. I've always been introverted. I had trouble in those situations, and then you layer on top of that I'm sober and all these people are drinking. And honestly, like, I came to the point where I truly felt like my calling in life was to help another man get sober, and more recently, it's to also help men get over the stigma of suicide, of all kinds of stuff, mental health, etc. And so when I first started saying that, it was the honest truth. Like that's actually what I was spending 90% of my time doing. I had like a 25-year business career, which I kind of put in the background. And I spent 90% of my time like sponsoring guys in AA. But I found the most amazing thing, which was like the guy standing there with the martini, right? And he's telling you, how big his nuts are, right? And I say. And it gets done with like this basically like machoing me out.
Yeah.
And I say, and he says, what do you do? And I say, actually, I help guys get sober. That's what I really enjoy doing.
Quiet.
And like my vulnerability,
right?
Like, he thinks for a minute. It's like,
you just trumped
what
him.
The fuck just happened, right?
Yep. You just right? You went in one sentence right past him.
And so like 10% of the guys walk off.
Yeah.
90% of the guys, all of a sudden, they take their vest off and they're like, my dad died of alcoholism. My brother has a problem. I actually drink too much. Like, and it's like I give them permission. To just take all that bullshit off and like and start having a real conversation.
And men really need that today, Tom. It's like, I'm like you. I kind of wear my heart on a sleeve. I'm comfortable crying in front of groups and in front of men and women and children and adults. And I think society today, men really lack that space. It's getting better. I mean, there's lots of podcasts on men vulnerability and stuff, but I still think, I'm about your age, and I think we try to wear this toughness, this Superman shield, and behind that shield, quite often the person holding it is not in a good place. And I was there too. You and I shared our stories. I think you've been in darker places than me in regards to having ideation, but I had that moment almost 2 years ago where I didn't want to live, and it was freaking terrifying, man. I never want to go back there. But yeah, I think what you're doing is so admirable because you're giving men permission to have these conversations. do you get much pushback in regards to? Probably not. I would guess most times you tell your story, you don't probably get a lot of pushback. Um,
I just think that I think that um, like I said, I think that actually most men have some level of awareness that the game's not working for them.
hmm,
And so, most men are interested, in that cocktail situation. Like, I have the most amazing conversations, honestly,
mm-hmm.
because, all of a
They're
sudden
real.
we're having a real conversation about real shit.
Mm-hmm.
There's like, 10% or maybe slightly higher number that are just so into their ego and so into the game of, the guy with the most toys wins that they just, it's not like they're negative. They just aren't interested or pretend they're not interested. But I think the vast majority of men at this point um, have some awareness that, they're lonely, that there's a crisis of meaning in their life, and that
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of playing this charade, and it's not going to end well.
No,
you
it
know?
doesn't. And I think I can certainly speak to that quest, that thirst I had for money and status, and it just became a distraction, and it was ultimately an illusion that there was so much more to the lived experience and what I was offering, and just for me to have a more enjoyable life, And so, where do you think for men our age, middle aged men, where do you think that pivot happens? Where do you think a man? I know mine. You probably know yours, but when you speak to men, it's like, why does it have to take a cancer diagnosis? Why does it have to take the death of a sibling or best friend that takes their own life? Why do we wait to things to happen before we change our behavior or change our mindset? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
why do we wait for midlife crisis?
right. So, like, I think, well, a couple things. One is that, in the addiction community, I've been taught that when I'm working with guys, like, I have no idea when grace is going to occur, right? So, like, the same
Mm-hmm.
circumstances in two different men's lives could lead to vastly different outcomes. One guy might change radically and the other guy will not, and
Right.
continue to use, right? But I think that, like, life is life, so hard shit's going to happen, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
all the shit you just listed, like, something like that will happen to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have some crisis. And I think it's at that moment when men, increasingly, look in the mirror and they're like, is this really, in handling this crisis, I have a new perspective on what's going on, and like, and what I'm doing makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I've actually just recently, again, I don't remember if I were saying on or off mic, but my technology ability stopped with the typewriter, the manual typewriter, but I've
Mm-hmm.
been actually exploring kind of the 18 to 24-year-old men, through TikTok and YouTube and the way they communicate on video.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually encouraged. There's a lot of young men out there, like, who are talking about this stuff, who are like,
Mm-hmm.
honestly trying to figure out what masculinity makes sense. I mean, and
Hmm.
so in some ways, like, I think that's the most vulnerable group. That's where the rate of suicide is going up the fastest. But at the same time, I think that there's an increasing dialogue amongst that group. Like, this is really screwed up, and we need to figure out a new paradigm for manhood.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I don't remember how much I've kind of divulged on the project we have coming this summer, our app that we're launching. We're really zeroing in on what you just said. Gen Z, which from my perspective is like 15 to 24, but technically it's like 10 or 12 to 26. But it's the largest generation in the history of the world. It's 1/3 of the world's population is basically 12 to 26. Um, but what you just said, Tom, is so true. They are the first generation of all time to have their number one New Year's resolution be mental health. Along with that, there are also 37% year over year increase in obtaining mental health services. So here's what's giving is they know they have issues and they're going to get treatment. But the problem is, what treatment are they going to? And unfortunately, it's medication, pharma, um, things that may be productive for the moment, but aren't changing behavior. Like, meditation's great, but that's not going to change behavior, especially in the short term. So going back to vulnerability, which I really think is kind of your sweet spot, is your ability to talk to other men and stuff. Let's go back to young men. One of the issues and the challenges with social media, and I want to get your thoughts on that, is as much as we can find some really positive things going on with TikTok, Instagram, things like that. The reality is a lot of adults, young adults, are swimming in despair because of a lot of things like imposter syndrome and bullying. And it used to be when you and I had a problem with a bully at school, it got settled one or two ways. You know, either you stood up to the bully or you just avoided him, and they bullied somebody else. But today you can't do that. Young men go home, they get on their phones, and they see other young men on YouTube making $2 million a year, driving a Lamborghini, which we know is not their Lamborghini, but they don't know that. So there's this whole set of imposter syndrome that comes into place. How do you take something like social media you talked about? How do you make that their ally? How do we make that their friend?
Yeah. So,
An easy question, by the way, Tom.
yeah, I know. So I actually wrote an article a little while ago that was entitled uh, "Greed, Lust, and Social Media Are
I
Destroying the
saw that
Male
on your
Destroying
Substack,
the
I think,
Male
right?
Soul."
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that, and I would kind of put those three evils right up there. I mean, not in judging anyone. Like, we're all human beings. We all have
Right.
defects of character, but I think we have this false narrative that the guy with the most money wins. We have a horrible gambling problem,
Oh,
actually.
we
Yeah, I
could
know.
spend a whole hour on that.
Don't.
Yeah. Cause I was a compulsive gambler for most of my life.
Yeah. And then we have. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues for all men is fear of intimacy and how we deal with our sexual conduct, to
Mm-hmm.
put it simply,
Yeah.
and that figuring out how to manage our way through a world that just wants to throw sex in our face all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and that fear of intimacy, of being comfortable in our own skin, generates lustful behavior that's self-destructive. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no guy coming out of a strip club or a massage parlor who like feels good about himself. He does not. Um,
That is true.
but I think
Yep.
those problems get exponentially worse with social media,
Uh-huh.
and as does, honestly, issue of isolation. At the bottom of all this is the data around men's isolation and loneliness, because that's what
Yeah.
causes the addiction. That's what causes the suicide. That's what causes, frankly, the breakdown of the human body, so that you get every major disease sooner: cancer, heart disease, everything.
Hmm.
And it's what causes, the Gen Z to be so at risk, is that they're alone and they're watching their feed. It's horrible. So, like,
And
I don't
COVID didn't help,
no,
obviously.
COVID didn't help any of that. I mean, all the suicide addiction, and just death from booze all went up,
Yeah.
astronomically
Yep.
during
Yep.
that period for men.
Right.
So I don't think there's an easy answer, but certainly what you and I are doing is part of it, which is just like telling the guy at the cocktail party that what am I doing now? I'm helping guys get sober. Like, I'm trying to do that on social media as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
the more that we can kind of put out positive messages to our young men, I think that will begin to turn the tide. But I think there's also a role for kind of education around the fact that social media really actually is harmful, like, at least as
Yeah.
it's currently construed, so that the amount of time that our teenagers are spending, rotting their mind and wounding their soul by comparing themselves to false
Mm-hmm.
personas is, just not helpful.
And I
So
don't know what the
I think
solution is.
education is part of it.
You think of the dopamine hit that a kid gets on
Fucking
TikTok
crazy, man. Well,
every 8 seconds.
that
It's
article was really about the fact that all, the greed, the sex, and the social media are all, I
yeah,
mean, dopamine nation. It's all the same thing. We're
yeah,
all addicts.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know it's easy for. I'm 56. I know it's easy for me to say, "Well, you kids," but hey, cell phones been around at that age. You and I'd been probably
100%.
equal or worse. Yeah, I
Dude, I'm
wouldn't.
a fucking addict, first and
Yeah,
foremost.
I know, and it's like, yeah, I'm obviously a technology addict because I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and I post and I do my radio shows and podcasts. So yeah, I live and die by it as well. But I think it's what they're watching and what they're getting their news, where they're getting their news from, and the the it's like I have my son's friends come over and they'll be on something and I'll look and there'll be a video of, a group of young men punching a 90-year-old in the face and they're like replaying it 5 or 6 times and it's just, I get it. We drive by car accidents, our next turn we look, but there's just something about continually watching those type of things that almost can become a prophecy.
The thing that I've been actually, I haven't written on it yet because I don't have enough clarity on it. But the thing that I find actually most troubling, and that I think all of us, in our generation, really need to think about is, these boys, they have some serious questions like that need to be
Mm-hmm.
answered,
Mm-hmm.
and like who's actually addressing those questions? And right now, there's a vacuum, and it's filled by very extremist, non-constructive men who,
Yeah.
you know, some of them are currently in jail, but
Yeah.
you know, who
I
have
know
millions and
exactly who you're
millions
talking. Yeah, I know who you're talking
and
about. Yep.
millions of followers,
Yep.
and
And they're the heroes.
at some level, they are actually answering that question better than we are, right? Because that's
They're
why.
definitely making a better an impact. They're
Well,
influencing those kids.
those kids are responding because they feel
Yeah.
like somehow they've been seen, and
Right.
so I don't know if it's me or you or somebody else, but somebody's got to fill that vacuum and address those questions in a way that's constructive. I don't
Hmm.
know quite how that happens, which is why I haven't written about it yet, but I just think there has to be some alternative.
Well, I can give you some ideas of where I think maybe some of that can come from. Is I think one part of it is this whole thing about purpose. And if you talk to young men or even young women, and let's say they're second year in college or first year, whatever, or maybe they're in high school, and you were to really talk to them about their concerns that they have about their future, you're going to hear things like, we don't trust your generation with what you've done with the climate.
Right,
The environment's a wreck. We don't think we're either going to have, my kids aren't going to be around to see the planet because you guys have kind of destroyed it. And then they're going to say, well, then when I listen to dad and grandpa at Christmas, all they do is one hates Trump, one loves Trump. And it's just politics suck and everyone hates each other. And they go on to the ocean is loaded with plastics. And it's like, and then it's like college, I graduate with, student debt and there's no jobs and everything's expensive and you and mommy are drunk all the time. And, the reality is 70% of parents, Tom, are paycheck to paycheck. So just relationships with money are dysfunctional for 7 out of 10 kids are in a household where their parents don't have any money for whatever reason. And it's like, so that's the world that these kids are growing up in, is a very distrusting, unfair world. And maybe you and I had the same world. We just didn't know about it. It wasn't in our face all the time. I couldn't see what was going on in other countries, because we didn't have the internet. So there's something about that dynamic where the speed of information is great, but it also can maybe magnify the issues that we have collectively as a human race. Things like global warming. Heck, I didn't even know. We didn't know any of that stuff in the 70s and 80s. Global warming wasn't even a term. I guess my point is back to you is that how do we put hope and inspiration? That's where I'm going with this. How do we put, and maybe it's not our obligation, but how do we show kids how to develop hope and inspiration in the world that they are viewing from?
I think it's absolutely our obligation. I have an 18-year-old son and a 26-year-old son, so everything you just said happens at my kitchen table all the
Yep.
fucking time.
Mine are
Um,
22 and 19, so I
yeah.
understand.
So like, and my son, the 18-year-old, it's like a huge. It's like this is the generation. Like he's an amazing athlete, and he's also an amazing environmental,
Yep.
zealot. So
Yeah.
it's like, Dad, you completely screwed our world. What the hell are you gonna
Yep.
do about it? Like he's really
Right.
pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyways, I mean, I don't have an answer to that one, but I do think hope and inspiration come from being brutally honest.
Mm-hmm.
An 18-year-old kid doesn't know, you know, the path that what's important in life, and the only way I've learned what's important in life is to go through all the incredible, painful, joyous experiences that I've had, in the last 35 years, right?
Do we allow our kids to do that though? I mean, do we as parents coddle them and protect them and keep them away from these
We
things because
coddle
it's
them
for
too
their?
much. But all
Yeah,
I'm saying is that I think there is wisdom, right? Like I have wisdom.
absolutely,
I have wisdom
100%.
in the fact that, like I finally have come to the point in my life where I really don't give a shit what you think about me because I actually have something in my soul that's way more valuable. And I
And
think
we've made
that's
more mistakes than we've had right decisions, you and I, over the years.
100%.
Yeah.
But that therein
Yep.
is the opportunity. And,
Right.
honestly, like I would tell you that for me, I'm, grateful for my mistakes because they got
Hmm.
me to where I am. I'm grateful that, 5 years ago I was locked up in a psych ward because if I hadn't done that and I
Right.
hadn't like worked through the God's honest truth of what was going on in my life, I'd still be in denial. I'd still be living a fake life. Um,
What got you? What got you? I'm curious, just to jump on that for a second, because you shared that with me when we first met. This is the first time our listeners have heard that. Um, Go back to that moment, and were you aware of the magnitude of your psychological challenges at that point? Now you are in hindsight, but when you were going through it, were you cognizant that this is something that wasn't quote normal? And then how did you get out of it? I mean, how did you get yourself to where you are today from just 5 or 6 years ago being in that ward?
yeah, so I got to kind of back up a little bit on that. Like I said, I got sober 26 years ago. I got thrown out of the house with two little kids because I was drunk and a cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And while at the same time, I was a CFO of a really big company. So like I
Oh
had
wow.
everything. I had a
Yeah.
beautiful house, beautiful wife, big job, the whole nine yards. On the outside, and on the inside, my soul was completely destroyed.
Hmm.
And so I did get sober, and I earned the right. I got sober actually in 1996, December 28th, because my ex-wife had said, like, in order for you to see these kids, my kids were 6 months and 2 years old at the time, you're going to
Wow.
need to get sober. I'm not going to let you near them. And that Christmas, I didn't see my kids um, because I wasn't sober. And so on the 28th of December, 1996, I realized I had a fundamental decision to make, and which was to either like kind of keep drinking and go down this path of slow suicide,
Mm-hmm.
or ask for help. And so I chose to ask for help, and that's the last day I had a drink. And I gradually earned the right to see my kids over time. I like to say that for me, spirituality is really important, and for me, one of the turning points in my life was when I finally earned the right to have my kids overnight. I never had joint custody
Hmm.
with my two big kids, but I did finally earn the right to have them overnight. And my son, my daughter's the older Carrie, and my son Seamus was the baby. And I was feeding my son a bottle. He's still that young, um, for the first time in my bachelor pad at night, and I just the feeling of his heart against my heart and him
Hmm.
falling asleep. and like, you know, that smell of a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I just looked down on my son and I was like, the drinking and the womanizing and the greed, all my professional success
Yeah.
meant shit compared to this kid in my arms. And so I committed myself at that point to be the best sober father I could be.
That's
And I've
beautiful, man.
tried. I mean, I've tried. I'm highly, highly imperfect, but I've given it my best
Well,
shot.
that makes two of us, but that's beautiful. I mean, that's absolutely, you had your epiphany moment.
Yeah. So then 6 years sober, I got remarried. I had another kid. So I have three. And I hadn't lost I completely ruined my personal life, but I hadn't lost my professional life. So I was
Mm,
very
okay.
successful. And like, you know, I started a venture capital firm. You know, I'm a big swinging dick.
Yeah.
And so that humility and connection with God, and, you know, connection with a network of people, men who were, you know, a good influence on my life, faded. And, you know, I just my ego kept growing back, honestly. And it got to the point where, and I wasn't a gambler in a casino, but I was certainly a gambler in terms of my investment strategy. And so, superficially, um, I started to have panic attacks about 6 years ago, when I was on
Mm,
vacation with my friend. And if you ever have a panic attack, you don't know what the hell it is. You think you think you have a heart attack. It's miserable. And superficially, I was worried about money. It was about all these risky investments I had, and I knew that they were stupid because I had made a ton of money, and there was no reason for me to have to
yeah.
risk it all again. But I had, and like I could
Right.
definitely see how I could go bankrupt. You know, um, so I tried at that point to get help, and like it didn't work. I was like the momentum downhill was too fast, and so for me, like I was meditating one day at my house and I realized that I had a very concrete plan to kill myself that day. I called my sister,
Mm,
who's a therapist, and she came over and walked me to the ER. And
wow.
went to one mental hospital, did not work. Went to McLean, which is an amazing facility. And I was like, complete surrendered, you know, give me whatever you got. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it was there that I started to get a little better, you know, and
Mm,
I stopped wanting to kill myself, and I got out of there almost exactly 5 years ago. And I went to a group of men and like told them exactly what had happened, and one of those guys, you know, helped me through a recovery process where I had to take a really hard look at myself and do a
mm-hmm.
bunch of work, and then I had to go back out and like make amends with all the people I had screwed over with my ego, you know, my in-laws, my ex-wife, my
Yeah.
business partners. And like
Yeah.
that's where it all changed for me. Like I had a business part, a venture, you know, one of my partners in my venture capital firm where I walked in and like I had a script because like I had worked, you know, with the guy who was mentoring me, um, about like making sure that I wasn't going to blame the other person and I wasn't going to make excuses for being a dick. And I get two sentences into this thing, and this guy's like, you know, very buttoned up Yankee, whatever, and guy starts bawling
Wow.
because he's like, I never in a million years thought you would admit what a fucking asshole you've been to me.
Right. And
And
that's
um, and,
liberating, man.
and so that those kinds of experiences is what turned me around.
So did you ever use AA, for example?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I guess I've seen, boy, AA is another whole topic you could spend an hour on. I've seen a lot of people that swear by it. I see a lot of people that swear at it. What's your thoughts on the effectiveness of AA?
I I think whatever works for you is
It's a good
fine, and I
answer.
don't really
Yep.
have any corner on how men should get better, other than I think you got to look deep inside. Um, and I think when it comes to addiction, I don't think medicine has an answer. So I do
I would
think that
agree with that
I do
wholeheartedly.
think that, at least for me and the men that I know, there has to be some miracle, some spiritual intervention that comes into play.
You're the
I
second person today. I just had lunch with a gentleman. We had the same conversation. He's been in recovery. Um, Similar story. And he mentioned the spiritual angle probably 6 or 7 times. So I do want to stop you on that for a moment and talk about that, because that again is a whole nother show. Because there's a confusion, I guess, in how we define what spirituality means. And not that there's a right or wrong, but I think there's just we throw words around sometimes without really clarifying. Now, full disclosure, I am agnostic. So I'm not, I simply just don't know. And I'm really open-minded. I'm curious to learn. I'm not an atheist, but I'm an atheist claims that they for sure know there isn't a God. I just don't know. I'm not smart enough. I haven't had any experience where the clouds parted and somebody came into my brain and said, "Here I am. I'm here to say." I've never had that experience. I've
How do
had
you feel about
moments.
the laws of nature?
How I feel is an opinion based on my intelligence level. I'm interested in these things. I had a psychology minor. I constantly talk and watch podcasts on science. I'm kind of consider myself a skeptic. Yet it's hard for me to think that there isn't another layer to what's going on with our lived experience that maybe we don't even know as humans how to comprehend it. Us as in me and you and everybody
I
else.
don't think you even need to think that there's another layer. I think you can just acknowledge the fact that the laws of nature are greater than you.
Oh,
Like,
hands down.
so
And I think they're just greater than all of us.
you're not
Yeah.
the one like who's going to stop the wave or like stop the
No,
tides or
no, but
that's enough. That's
I've had
enough.
a few,
You
yeah,
believe in something, right?
yeah, and really, lack of belief is still a belief. But the
So
reality is that I am so comfortable with the fact that if you are a extremely quote religious person, let's just say a Catholic, and that's your doctrine, that's what you grew up, that's the house you went to, that's kind of what was explained to you when you were a child. That's what you really believe in your heart. And you've even had moments where you've seen God. As long as at the end of the day you're a good person, you're morally correct, or you're making good decisions for the benefit of mankind, and you're not an asshole, and you're human, you make mistakes. That's great. Or if you're an atheist and you're overly a good person, and you don't, you're not an asshole. I know assholes on both sides of the fence there very well. And so to me, it's like I don't really care what you believe in, as long as your behavior is in line with humanity, at the best interest of humanity. And so I think you could be both and be very spiritual. I'm spiritual, and
right.
I
So
use that word.
let me stop you.
I use
It's
that
like,
word every day. I
all
love that
right. So
word.
let me tell you where I'm at, which is this, which is that I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form. I was
Nor am
brought up
I.
Quaker, which is kind of not even a religion.
Quaker. You're the first one I've
Yeah,
ever say that on a
but
podcast.
but I believe in God, and I believe in God with a small G. I don't believe in like some guy with white hair up in the heavens. I
Yeah,
believe in a force, a life
like a collective
force.
universe, like us.
Yeah, and so for me, um, that's the guiding principle of my life. It has to be because like
Mm-hmm.
if it's not that, it's my ego, and my ego gets me in shit tons of trouble. And so I need to understand that like I am not the center of the universe. I am
Mm.
not. And so all my character development, all my self examination, all my amends work, whatever, all my work with all my service work with other men is all driven by a belief in that life force. And
When
and
did
you
this
know,
happen?
I
Like
meditate like
what age?
crazy. I
Do you
do all
remember what
this.
age you were when you kind of had that um, realization?
Oh, I had well, dude. When I'm like CFO of a company, running around cheating on my wife, drinking my brains out, there was no realization about any of that stuff. Um,
Hmm.
it came to me in part when I got sober, and then went away, and then came to me on the floor of that fucking psych ward. where I was
Yeah.
like, shit, I got to figure this out. And then,
Mm.
honestly, it really came to me through the work on myself of the last 5 years, which is
Right.
the healing in myself so that I no longer hated myself. And I felt good about myself, and I felt like I had something to offer another man. And so that instead of focusing on myself all the time, I focused on service to like get that next guy sober. That's my
It's
guiding, that's my
huge. I
calling.
love it.
But
I
I,
love
I,
it.
I think I think you got to try not to confuse. Um, you know, I don't think you're actually an agnostic. I think we're actually are very close in our beliefs. So, like, I think you can get tripped up by religion, and so
Yeah.
this is my view, which is that if you really look closely at all religion, they're all saying pretty much the same thing, and there are many people who follow those faiths, who get a lot out of it and are, like you
Right.
said, do good work. And there's a lot of, human, um, structure that has done a lot of damage. And,
Mm.
if you go look at, some of the scholars, like Richard Rohr, for instance, who's a very devout Catholic priest,
Mm-hmm.
he would say that Catholicism is generally not practiced the way that Jesus wrote about it in the Bible.
Hmm. I can see
because
that.
because what Jesus intended was what I'm talking about.
Right.
Not, you know, I mean, we were just recently in the Vatican, and my
Oh,
son,
cool.
my older son, that happens to be very Catholic,
Yeah.
and you're walking around there, and you're like, "Is this what Jesus was talking about?"
I've been there
I
too.
mean, like,
Yeah. I
really,
know.
really,
Yeah.
like the
Yep.
Sistine Chapel. This is what we're talking about. Humility
Right.
and, like, hanging out with the people who are sinners and sufferers. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I really don't think so. So
Yeah.
I think religion can get far off track, and which isn't to say that I don't allow anyone to practice whatever the hell faith they want.
Yeah.
But to me, it's about spirituality. That's what saved my life, and that's, to me, like, what's so important. Talk to our boys about in terms of, like, you have to. If you're running around trying to get that Ferrari or that Maserati or like that stripper girl, that's a religion too. That's a faith too. And it's a
Hmm.
really fucked up one. It's not going to help you.
Yeah. You said something that really hit close, and you said something. You said the word ego, and there's something about what I call the death of ego, and a lot of people talk about this. Different experiences they've had in their lives about the moment my ego died is where I was born. And I think, with age comes wisdom. And I think when I look back on my life and look at moments that I thought were, I was chasing the right things, like you just talked about, um, ego got in the way always. And I think the moment that I realized that, there's more to this lived experience than what I know and what I've even experienced. I mean, substantially more. And I'm just really excited about the future of learning more about these things. But, again, for me, agnosticism isn't, I guess it is a belief. It's more of an admittance that I don't know what's going on. That's my belief, is that if I said I knew what's going on, I know in my heart I'd be lying, because I've never had any evidence revealed to me that would show that I can validate that. But I like to think that when I'm gone, Tom, that I don't just turn in the dust and wilt away, that there's something to do with the collective consciousness of the universe, where each of our little consciousness goes into a bigger consciousness, and maybe that is where this whole thing plays out. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Yeah, well, look at it this way. So, like, I have these, like, very theological conversations with my son, who's like the, hardcore. He's a Jesuit, but he's Catholic, and
Mm-hmm.
we agree on this, which is that, which I think is really what you're talking about, which is that, if there is a God, I don't, there's the power is so great that I can't understand him or her.
True.
And so, like, what you're saying is, like, you don't know, like, how this all works. I sure as hell don't know how all this works.
Yeah.
So, like, we're saying the same thing. I really
But in the
don't think it's
meantime,
different.
we can be good people, right? I mean, that's the thing. Is like
Well,
while we're
I
what
choose. I would call faith. My faith is the belief that whatever that power is that I can't really understand is positive.
Yeah,
I
I think
believe
that's
it's
good.
positive.
I like that. I
I
like that.
believe that like if I
I like that.
it's love. I feel like it's
Right.
love. Like that is whatever the God force is that. And that's what our boys don't have. Is they
I
don't
like
have that
that.
connection of love.
Right.
And let me just go back to the ego thing, which is that it's not one and done. It's not the death of the ego and then all you're cured, right?
Understand that. Yep.
And so like for me what's so important is to have a group of men around me who hold me accountable. And so like every day is a
Mm-hmm.
fight. And like particularly, if I'm out there like, writing shit and like trying to like get the message out there, in service, I need to be damn sure that like there's not like a sneaky little way that my ego's getting in there. And so those
Mm.
men have to hold me accountable, and they do. They say like, dude, you're off track. You got to check yourself there. And I'm not perfect. Um,
There's so much. There's so much about what you just said that I know is intentional, but if you really dig deeper, there's where I think some help could be for the young men in this country. And you've said it a couple times. It's in service. There's something about it being in service of others with really no expectations. You're not going to go say, "Hey, I volunteered at a nursing home," and go post it on social media. That becomes an ego play then. It could be good. It could be people that could look at that and replicate that, and that's powerful. If someone says, "Hey, I can do that too," but a lot of that turns into just self promotion. But I think there's something we can do as adults to, well, first show our kids by doing it, right, being example. I think if you're in service, I'm in service, our children watch dad. That's, I was an alcoholic, so are you. I've had suicidal ideation, so have you. I mean, our stories are very similar, Tom, but if our kids can see what we're doing now in service, truly genuinely in service of others without expectations of reciprocating, it does happen. It's just, that's part of how it works. You do something good for people, that it tends to come back at you. But do it without that expectation. I think there's something that we can do for our kids, our young men in this country. Instead of trying to figure out a way to find your purpose, just start doing things for other people. And it may or may not reveal itself eventually. It may not reveal itself immediately, but I have to think if you're in service enough, it'll reveal itself eventually. What's your
yeah, and
thoughts
I
on
think that
that?
does like, my big son's in the army, and his whole life is about service.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
my younger son really understands it. I mean, I had my 58th birthday in December, and like we had a dinner party, and I had 10 guys over who are all in their 30s and like trying to get sober. That was my
Mm.
birthday party, and my son
See,
was
I
there.
think
Like
that's beautiful. I think
he
that's
saw it,
awesome.
and I love these guys. I love them. It was
Yeah.
I had the greatest time of my life. But yeah, so I think that there's something there. I think the other thing that comes to mind is there's this book, Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, came out recently, and it's really the best book I've read. He's a pure academic. He's like just looking at the
Mm.
data. There's no political agenda about it at all. And
Mm-hmm.
but one of his ideas is that what we really should do is have national service for our boys. Um, with the idea that like they're so siloed, and
Mm-hmm.
that what they need is to like interact with each other and interact with kids who are not, boys that are not like them. And so it almost
Mm.
doesn't even
Yeah.
matter what they do. Like you can
Right.
send them out into like a horse farm and have them like clear
Mm-hmm.
brush. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But if they're out there together, talking to each other and interacting with each other, you know, magic will happen, and their minds will expand from like sitting there on their phone, by themselves and getting all these negative, like, bullshit messages.
Well, then there's a proliferation of people kind of taking advantage of that window of opportunity. And one is, I won't mention I won't dignify him by mentioning his name, but he's in jail right now in some foreign country. But, he's filled a void, like you said, for young men that are looking for something. But then you got people like Jordan Peterson, who kind of came onto the spotlight really from his initial claim to fame was something really nothing to do what he's doing now. but he was a disruptor and got real popular with what he was doing up there in Canada. And now he's kind of gravitated towards saving young men. That seems to be a lot of what he talks about. His recent book, I think it's what, the 12 Rules of Life or something, very heavily geared towards young men. But, so there are people coming in kind of filling that void. And I just didn't know if you keep an eye on some of these people out there that are, I think their intentions are all good, but sometimes I question maybe the way they're doing it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I only have limited exposure to Jordan Peterson. What I have seen, I just think that sometimes people like to simplify things and try and
Yeah.
be very rigid about it. And um, boys are suffering, so they're looking for anything to hold their hat on, and so they can be easily misguided. And so, like what I've seen from him, like some of it's benign, some of it's not benign, and just dead
Right.
wrong. And so,
Right.
on balance, I don't think it's helpful, and I don't think it's kind of the thoughtful approach that actually solves the problem. I think it's just like a band-aid, and can be damaging at times. I think we need, like I said, I think we need alternate voices and alternate structures to get to our boys in ways that are a lot deeper than that. I don't think that Jordan Peterson's going to solve any problems, put it that way.
No. No.
So,
No.
whether it's national service or education or different ways for men to mentor boys. I don't really know
Yeah.
what the answer is, but there has to be a kind of more substantive response than kind of this disruptor social media, guys who, I mean, at the end of the day, they're all just making a buck, honestly. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. They come in guns a blazing. We have the widget to solve all problems, and that dies out pretty quick. And some of them are sustainable for a while, but just it kind of goes back to some core things that weren't a whole lot different than when you and I were kids, and that's connectivity. Just intimate relationships. I don't know if this is a correct statement or not, but I think young men today are having they're less intimate with their sexual partners. There's less of that going around than it was
well,
when I grew
porn has
up.
ruined everything. I mean,
That's what
porn's
I mean. And so
destroyed.
it's like
I mean,
young men are just their
they learn how to
girlfriend
have
is
sex on
porn.
porn, and like
Yeah,
they're trying to
right.
replicate that, which is completely
Yeah,
dysfunctional. I mean,
yeah.
it's honestly, just as an aside, like it's not good for the boys. It's horrible for the girls. But
Right.
the boys aren't. I mean, the the part of sex that's good is that the other person is actually into you and like sees
Enjoy.
you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It isn't
And
all
so,
about
like,
you. Yep.
if you're using them, like, it's not
Yeah.
enjoyable. Like, you may think
Right.
it's like macho, but like, it's
Yeah.
it's it's actually not. And so it's just like missing the point. Um,
But that's another elephant in the room that just doesn't get discussed when I go to mental health conferences or I go to Zoom meetings with 20 advocates and we talk. I mean, there's like two things that never come up, and that's the lack of actual human intimate relationships being replaced with pornography, and then the financial the relationship with money is just not discussed. And you've got, again, a third of the world's population where in the next 2 years, they're going to have 4 times the purchasing power Gen Z does than they have today. They're going to have a lot of disposable income, and they're going to have a lot of opportunities to do 401k through payroll deduction, to do Roth IRAs, to build a credit score up, to have a credit card and understand how it works. They're going to have a lot of opportunities here in the next 2 years, and the problem is most of them are just woefully unprepared for the simplest aspects of finances that are not taught in schools. They're just not, and they're not taught by their parents because 70% of the parents are broke. So where's it going to come from? I guess.
yeah, I mean, well, the title of the article is "Sex, Greed, and Social Media is just crushing the male soul."
Isn't
It's
that
sex and
isn't
money.
that
I
true?
mean, honestly, with the adult guys I work with, that's what it comes to. I mean, even if they're drug addicts or booze addicts or gambling or whatever, like in the end, it's like what is your relationship to sex and money? And like that's what we need to teach our boys is like what is a healthy relationship with sex and money, and be educated, like you said. Like, there's a whole literacy around money that's not being given our boys, and there's really a literacy around sex and intimacy and
Mm,
and love. I mean, again, it's like sex is about love. It's not about porn. I mean, I'm sorry,
yeah.
but like, and so that we need to we need to get that information to our boys, which is that none of this is it's not a winning strategy. Like going for the Lamborghini and like hooking up with a stripper is just not a winning strategy in life. Like you may think it is, but it's not. Um, and so I think there are ways to educate and reach boys, but I'm really worried. I mean,
Well,
it's a huge problem.
one thing will certainly help, and this is the um, one of the wonderful things about social proof is I think to really make a change is it's gonna come from kids to kids.
Yeah.
Find the Gen Zers that are you know out there doing what you and I are talking about right now. We just sound like two old men right now. We do. I mean, if we were in a group of 17-year-old boys, they'd say, "Look at these two old prudes."
Yeah.
I mean, shit. They're out chasing girls, and we're talking about sex being love, and they're like, "Oh, screw that." I'm not interested in that. I get that. But if other kids their age were saying the same message you and I are saying, it goes on different set of ears. It goes on deaf ears if it comes from you and me. But I really think there's an opportunity for those Gen Zers that are doing mental health advocacy, that are talking about relationships and money and these things, but they're 17, 18, 19, 20, and they're out there. I talk to them every day. I think if we could give them a platform through what you're doing, what I'm doing, what other adult mental health advocates are doing, if we can somehow get these kids a platform where they could kind of do our work for us, we can fill them up with our wisdom, but they take the message to the kids. I think there's a really big opportunity for something like that, and I think it's kind of ours for the taking. Um, it's out there, and I think that's one way. One way we can get. I know. For me, when I was that age, I was more likely to accept something from a peer as being more impactful to me than if my dad told me. Even though my dad was a doctor, he's still my dad. Or if my dad's neighbor told me, it didn't mean the same. And this is my big concern, and my only concern I have with advocates that go to schools and give presentations, and they're 56-year-old guys in recovery. I hate to tell you, I don't know how effective that is to a group of 18-year-olds in a high school. Scared straight, or whatever that was, didn't work too well back in the 80s when I was listening to those lectures. It'd be nice if we could get an army of kids to go to schools, tell the same message. They're not going to have maybe the wisdom, but you know what, Tom, my 19 and my 20-year-old, they have buried an older brother. They have buried a mother. They've seen a dad, alcoholic dad, a compulsive gambler dad. You don't think that's wisdom? I mean, shit, that's a lot of life experiences at 19 and 22 years old. There are kids out there that I think have the capabilities of telling the same message you and I are telling, but maybe have a better impact. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
So two things. One, 100% agree that we need to put front and center peers. So actually, as you know, like I've moved all my stuff to Substack, and so like actually my
Yeah.
article tomorrow is highlighting two of those guys who I really admire, who are Gen Z, who are like doing awesome stuff on all these
How do people
issues.
reach your Substack real quick?
It's Thomas Matlack uh, on Substack.
Matlack.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Okay.
but anyways, so I'm just highlighting two guys who I found in my journeys who I think are like, one of them is a comedian and he's just hilarious.
That's
And
awesome.
he's like, 23 and he's also, unlike me, he has all the technology. So his shit looks really good.
Right.
So there's that. And so I totally agree that we need to like put that front and center. But I also think that, you can't underestimate like how much a true message does resonate. So like I have been on Instagram. I'm not anymore, but I have been, and kind of just saying the shit I've been saying to you,
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe in a slightly more articulate way. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
my 18-year-old son's friends all follow me,
Hmm.
and they all, and a couple of them don't have dads, admittedly, but like
Yeah.
I talked to my son about it. And I'm like, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, Dad, my friends think you're the shit. I'm like,
You're
hey,
the bomb, Tom. You're
right.
the bomb.
I'm like totally honest on there. I talk about all this shit on there. And like,
That's
they're
great.
like, somebody's actually fucking telling the truth to me. And like, no one else is. So I think I think you might underestimate the power of,
Yeah.
true soul honesty.
And really, if you talk to any mom or dad that goes to high schools and gives presentations, I think, you know, when they walk away, they say, if I helped one kid,
Right. Right.
and that is at the end of the day, that's all I'm trying to do every time I have a podcast. If one person watches our conversation today and something happens, whether they become spiritual or they decide to go to AA or whatever, or they decide to check into a psych ward,
They try to help somebody.
that's a courageous move. That's
Yeah,
courageous.
try and help somebody. I mean, I think service is like for those kids. I think that ability to get out of themselves, like that's a
Yeah.
virtuous cycle. Because I think once you start thinking about someone else, I mean, it's called enlightened self interest, which is like it feels
Hmm.
really good to help somebody else. Like, and you're
It
like,
does, man.
shit, I want to do that more.
Nothing is better. And for anybody watching this podcast, I love direct messages, handwritten notes. I used to keep like a thing on my wall when I launched my book a couple years ago, and I saved all. And now I got so many. I actually just took it down because I couldn't read any of them. But yeah, there's just no monetary value you can put on.
Yeah, the reason why I help guys get sober, it's 100% selfish, which is that
Yeah,
like
I
I
understand.
start working with a guy who is completely fucking hopeless. Like his life is gone. And
Hmm.
then over a period of time, not always, like I have a portfolio of guys because like addicts
Sure.
like to go out, but like a
Yeah.
portfolio of guys, and the ones who, who get it, like the light goes on in their eyes. Like I just
Mm.
went to a wedding of a guy who like actually relapsed halfway through my working with him, but he's got his shit together, and he had, has two kids, and was getting married, and like I was a witness to it, and I got to tell you, like watching the joy in that guy's face is like 1,000 times better than any freaking deal I ever closed as a venture capitalist.
Or
Like the joy in my heart.
any expensive bottle of wine you cracked open,
Oh, it's like, that's the real deal. And I think, young men can, young men can experience that, and access that kind of virtual cycle.
Yeah, and they'll emulate us. And I don't say us as in like you and I are anointed some great humans, but I think if they see what you're doing, what I'm doing, other adults are doing for after what we've been through, to say, I'm doing all these things now because of what happened to me 5, 6 years ago. When they look at their own lives, they may not have the perspective of time. Like 6 years to a 18-year-old is a third of their life. It's like maybe for them they can look backwards 6 months, maybe look back a year, and they can say, "Man, if Tom did this, if Jeff did this, my grandpa just died. I can do it too." Or I just put our pet down. I can do it too. Or I got a girlfriend cheated on me. I can do this too. It's like, I think, like you said, I think maybe I'm my own worst critic, but I think I need to give myself more credit that every time I repeat the story, there's somebody listening that I may never hear from that decided to make a change in their life. And for
Well,
that, I'm grateful.
I would go back to the idea that you don't know when grace is going to happen, because, like, I also view it as planting a seed. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily come up
Yep.
at that moment, but like maybe you talk to that kid and he's a total jerk and like doesn't listen to you at all, but he something registers in his brain, and like 6 months later or 5 years later, he's in a situation and it comes back to him, and he
Mm.
decides, he's like, wow, Tom or Jeff was right about that. and that your work, that seed comes to fruition at some point later on that you don't even see it, you don't know, but you've had an impact.
Listen, dude, this has been a fast hour. I just looked and we're right at 60 minutes. So to wrap this up, how do people reach you if there's anyone listening that wants to be a part of your program to, follow, talk to you, whatever? What are the best ways for people? And I'm going to have all your link when this posts, I'm going to have all your links so people can get everything, but
Yeah, I mean, probably the most direct. I'll talk to anyone on email, so people can email me to get more information. And it's Thomas, THOMAS Matlack, MATLACK, all one word, at gmail.com. You can also look for me on, like I said, Substack, and it's just Thomas Matlack on Substack as well. Two best places.
well, listen, man, I enjoyed the conversation. I have a feeling you and I will be able to collaborate down the road on more things as we, build out our initiatives. But thanks very much for being on the Living Undeterred podcast. And I really appreciate your time, man.
Namaste. Big love.
Namaste, you bet. Back at you.